When someone apologizes too much, it is easy to mistake it for politeness or humility, but psychologically, this behavior is rarely about manners. More often, it is a learned survival strategy. At some point in their early life, these individuals discovered that harmony was preserved not through expression, but through retreat. Saying sorry became a way to soften the world, to lower the emotional temperature of a room before it could turn dangerous. Over time, the apology stopped being a response to wrongdoing and became a reflex, an automatic offering of peace before conflict even appeared. From a Jungian perspective, this pattern emerges when the psyche learns that visibility invites risk. The child senses that asserting needs, opinions, or even emotions might provoke rejection or withdrawal of love. So the ego adapts. It learns to shrink, to preemptively take blame, to apologize for existing too loudly. What once protected the individual in a fragile environment becomes, in adulthood, an invisible prison. The tragedy is that many who apologize excessively believe they are being kind, when in truth they are betraying themselves. An apology meant to preserve connection slowly erodes identity, and the question worth asking is not why am I so sorry, but what did I learn to fear? Because the moment you stop apologizing for your presence is the moment you begin to live from your truth. Another layer beneath excessive apologizing is not guilt, but fear specifically, the fear of disapproval. Many people who apologize constantly are not admitting fault. They are attempting to manage perception. They sense tension, hesitation, or emotional distance in others, and instinctively move to repair it, often by taking responsibility for things they did not cause. In psychological terms, this is not honesty, but appeasement. From a Jungian lens, the individual becomes overly identified with the persona, the social mask designed to secure acceptance. The inner self learns that being liked feels safer than being truthful. As a result, authenticity is quietly sacrificed. One apologizes for asking questions, for setting boundaries, for existing with needs and opinions. The apology becomes a way to say, "Please don't reject me," without ever speaking those words aloud. This pattern often leads to a subtle form of self-betrayal. When you apologize without cause, you teach yourself that your voice is disruptive and your feelings are excessive. Over time, this erodes inner confidence and creates a chronic anxiety around human connection. You are no longer relating, you are negotiating your right to belong. The real work begins when you allow disapproval to exist without rushing to erase it. Discomfort is not danger, and the courage to be misunderstood is the first step toward psychological freedom. For many who apologize excessively, guilt is not a response to wrongdoing. It is a permanent emotional background. This is what happens when self-worth becomes fragile. The individual begins to feel responsible not only for their actions, but for the emotions, comfort, and stability of everyone around them. If someone is upset, confused, or disappointed, the apologizer instinctively assumes fault. Guilt replaces identity, and responsibility expands far beyond what is reasonable or healthy. From a psychological standpoint, this reflects a distorted sense of agency. The person unconsciously believes they possess the power to disturb others simply by being themselves. Their presence feels intrusive, their needs feel burdensome, and their desires feel selfish. This internal narrative quietly teaches the mind that peace must be purchased through self-blame. Apologies become a form of emotional currency, paid not because a debt exists, but because the person feels indebted for existing at all. Jung would describe this as a misalignment between the ego and the self. The ego, weakened by chronic guilt, no longer trusts its own legitimacy. Instead of asking, "Did I do something wrong?" the individual asks, "Am I wrong?" This question is far more dangerous. To understand why excessive apologizing becomes so deeply ingrained, we must return to its origin. For many, this habit was shaped in childhood, not through words, but through atmosphere. In homes where emotions were unpredictable, where anger arrived without warning, or where affection was conditional, the child learned to scan the environment constantly. Safety depended on reading subtle cues and responding quickly. Apologizing became a way to restore balance, even when nothing had been done wrong. Psychologically, the child learns that mistakes are not events, but identities. A raised voice, a cold silence, or a withdrawn parent teaches the nervous system that harmony is fragile and easily broken. The apology is an attempt to regain control over chaos. Over time, this response becomes automatic, carried into adulthood long after the original threat has disappeared. The adult continues to apologize, not to correct behavior, but to calm an old fear stored in the body. From a Jungian perspective, this is the psyche repeating an outdated adaptation. What once protected the child now limits the adult. The tragedy is not that the strategy existed, but that it was never questioned. Growth begins when you recognize that your present relationships are not your past. You no longer need to earn safety, and the moment you stop apologizing for survival is the moment you begin living by choice. Healing begins when guilt is examined rather than obeyed. Not every discomfort is your responsibility, and reclaiming your worth starts the moment you stop apologizing for being human. As this pattern follows a person into adulthood, it begins to shape how others respond to them. Excessive apologizing quietly alters the balance of authority in relationships. When someone apologizes reflexively, even in moments that require confidence or clarity, they unintentionally signal uncertainty about their own position. This is not a moral failure, but a psychological one. Self-trust has been weakened, and the world responds accordingly. From a social perspective, repeated, unnecessary apologies can erode credibility. Words lose weight when they are offered too easily. Others may begin to overlook boundaries, dismiss contributions, or assume emotional responsibility where none was given. What begins as an attempt to keep peace gradually teaches others that your needs are negotiable and your limits flexible. The tragedy is that this often happens without conscious consent. Jung would say that authority does not come from dominance, but from inner alignment. When the ego doubts its right to exist as it is, the outer world mirrors that doubt. Apologizing without cause fragments the psyche. It separates action from conviction and speech from belief. Over time, the individual feels invisible, not because they lack substance, but because they continually step out of their own center. The shift occurs when apologies are replaced with presence. Speak only when necessary, stand when uncertain, and let silence carry what guilt once did. Authority begins the moment you stop asking permission to be yourself. The final movement in this psychological journey is not about eliminating apologies, but about restoring meaning to them. Healing begins when a person learns to pause. In that pause, something profound happens. The nervous system realizes it is no longer under threat. Instead of reacting from old guilt or fear, the individual starts responding from awareness. An apology, when it comes, is no longer automatic. It is intentional, grounded, and honest. From a Jungian perspective, this is the process of integration. The parts of the psyche that once learned to shrink are invited back into consciousness, not to be rejected, but understood. Sorry is replaced with presence, explanation, or silence. One learns to say, I understand, instead of I'm sorry, or to state a need without cushioning it in self-blame. This is not coldness, it is clarity, and clarity is a form of respect, both for oneself and for others. As this shift takes place, relationships change, not because the person becomes harder, but because they become real. They stop managing emotions that are not theirs, and begin standing inside their own experience without apology. The psyche regains coherence, the voice regains weight. The work, ultimately, is simple but demanding, to tolerate discomfort without self-erasure. And the moment you stop apologizing for your existence is the moment your life begins to speak with authority